What's up, everybody? Alex here. Welcome back to another video. Hey, cheers, huh? A little bit of a different video today. It's like a half concert review, half dedication, tribute, appreciation, what have you, for one of my favorite musicians of all time, and just the experience that I had yesterday. So first and foremost, because that's what the title of the video is, today I'm going to talk a little bit about the concert that I saw last night here in Columbus from Stickmen. So Stickmen is a three-piece progressive rock band that currently consists of, and has consisted of for a while, the great Tony Levin, Pat Mescalado, who has played with King Crimson since the Thrack days, I think. He was one of like the three drummers, but he was one of the original people that came back in the 90s with Bill Bruford. And then Marcus Rütter, who is a German Chapman stick player who's done a million different things. But those three make up the Stickmen. They're called the Stickmen because Pat plays the drums, but then Marcus and Tony play the Chapman stick. If you don't know what the Chapman stick is, it's actually kind of hard to describe, but it's a big multi-stringed instrument. I mean, typically the Chapman sticks will have anywhere between 8 to 12 to sometimes more strings. They're played sort of double-handed in a sense. They can be very percussive. Essentially, it just opens up a lot of noises and musical tones that are not achievable on a regular bass or guitar or whatever sort of thing. So I got a chance to see Stickmen last night in a pretty tiny place here in Columbus that fits, I would guess, less than 250 people, if that. And it was a great show. But for me, and what I'm really here to talk about, was me going there to see and be so close to the great Tony Levin. I'll bury the lead a little bit here. This is their most recent record called Tentacles, and I was lucky enough to meet all of the guys afterwards and get it signed, which is super cool. You'll see some pictures at the end of this video that I was able to take with all of them. So that's Stickmen, an amazing show. They opened the show with Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 1, which was dope. And then, the rest of it is, the thing is, I love the show because I'm weird and nerdy. But the music they play is, if you're like a progressive rock fan, you'll probably like it. But if you don't like prog, you'll definitely hate it. I mean, it's nerdy stuff. The weird, ongoing time signatures. They were like teaching people how to clap in 11/8 and stuff. I mean, it's that type of stuff. But again, I was just there to witness the sheer great musicianship and then obviously see the great Tony Levin. So I'm going to do kind of a little bit of a testimony on how I got into Tony, where I know Tony from, a little bit of his discography. I'm not a scholar, I'm just a big fan, and I'm sure a lot of people who are Tony fans can comment below and tell me some other stuff. But first of all, something to point out, Tony is like 79. He's almost 80 years old. He's been doing this for a really long time. Started as a session player, and I pulled a couple different things. He was doing a lot of stuff starting in, I think, very, very late 60s, very, very early 70s. But two records that I pulled that he was a session musician on happen to be two of my favorite records of all time, so I wanted to show them. The first is my favorite Lou Reed record. We thought we were going to go with Lou Reed, and that's Berlin from 1973. He actually plays bass on this record on the song The Kids, which is like the saddest, most heartbreaking song ever. Pretty tragic, actually, but I love it because I love tragic music. But yeah, this was 73, and again, session player, come on in, play on a couple of tracks, whatever. And 2 years later, he ended up playing on one of my favorite records from one of my favorite artists, Welcome to My Nightmare. In fact, I think he was responsible for that opening boom, 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 boom. That's a good rendition, right? Of Welcome to My Nightmare, the title track, the very first track that opens this record. So again, in these early to mid 70s, I mean, he's a session rat, big time, but obviously really kind of, getting his legs and getting known across the world. Now, this will be a little bit all over the place because I haven't really figured out exactly how I want to do this video. But for me, I did not get into Tony Levin through Lou Reed. I did not get into Tony Levin through Peter Gabriel, who I'll talk about here in a second. I didn't even get into him through King Crimson, who I'll talk about in a second. Much like anything else, for those who know me and watch me, that I'm a big fan of Dream Theater. Who would have thought everything goes back to Dream Theater? Well, if you didn't know, in 1998, Mike Portnoy, the drummer of Dream Theater, wanted to start a supergroup. He had just done everything he was doing, it was all Dream Theater all the time. He wanted to start an instrumental super group, completely separate from Dream Theater, right? He didn't want to have any Dream Theater members in the band. In fact, the original incarnation of what was supposed to be the super group was going to be Mike Portnoy on drums. It was going to be Jordan Rudess on keyboards. Now, Jordan would later join Dream Theater, but at the time he wasn't a member of Dream Theater. Tony Levin on bass. And at the time, the rumor was that he wanted it to be Jim Matheos from Fate's Warning. That was going to be the original four-piece. But Jim couldn't do it, and so they got into pickle, and they just went over and brought over John Petrucci, of course, from Dream Theater. So it was already at that point 2 parts Dream Theater, and then would become 3 parts Dream Theater because Jordan would end up joining the band. But, of course, the band, the supergroup I'm talking about is Liquid Tension Experiment. So this record's from 1998. Their debut. This is instrumental, crazy, progressive, fusion-y, aggressive, speedy, melodic. There's a little bit of everything on this record. There's a ton of Dream Theater fans I've talked to that say, I can't do Dream Theater, but I love Liquid Tension Experiment. What's funny is Liquid Tension Experiment's kind of become like Dream Theater Junior, but the reality is that's tough because, again, it was really Mike and John from Dream Theater. Jordan was not a member of Dream Theater when they did this record. In fact, it was the experience of him doing this record with those guys that he said, okay, actually, yeah, I probably could join. These cats know how to play. But obviously the great Tony Levin here. So this was my first exposure and experience to Tony Levin, was playing this type of stuff. And I actually asked him, I got a chance last night and asked him, I said, I got to ask, what was it like playing Liquid Tension with Liquid Tension Experiment? Because they put out this record in 98, they put out their second record in 99, and then they came back for their third reunion record. It was a COVID record just a couple years ago, and everybody lost their mind, and it's amazing. But I asked what it was like playing with Liquid Tension Experiment, and he goes, man, he said something like, that stuff's really hard to play. And you listen to it, and you're like, yeah, it is. But this is amazing stuff. But this is what introduced me to Tony Levin. And so I say all that going backwards a little bit because this was what I was into in high school. Loving this stuff, digging this stuff. That's what put Tony Levin on the map for me. And then I sort of went backwards in time a little bit. So got through some of the studio stuff, got through some of the, what got me into him. His big, I would say, break and what he sort of became really known as primarily at this time in the mid to late 70s was as sort of the official bassist and other instruments in Peter Gabriel's band. So Peter Gabriel's debut, Peter Gabriel, or Car, as it's called. This was 77. This sort of started the long relationship between Peter and Tony that is still going today. In fact, the other record I pulled, as a lot of you know, I've become a huge Peter Gabriel fan. He's all over. He's on I.O., which just came out last year. He still was touring with Peter at this point. So he's been an ongoing, consistent member of Peter Gabriel's both studio band, in the studio, being a part of the songs and live. And that was really the huge thing. But also, what you're talking about with Peter Gabriel is somebody was a session musician at this point because they were going through a little bit of a break with their band, King Crimson. And of course, I'm talking about Robert Fripp, who put out this solo record in 1979 and actually pulled Tony because of their work together in Peter Gabriel's band. So Robert Fripp, Tony Levin, they're all working in Peter Gabriel's band, and Fripp pulled Tony to do this is a great record, by the way, Exposure, 1979. And that would sort of lay the groundwork for the relationship of what would become when the great King Crimson would reunite in the 80s for these 3 outstanding records. Of course, they would call back Bill Bruford. He would show up, and then they would pull Adrian Belew, who was coming from Talking Heads at the time. He was in Bowie's band, I think, doing some wacky stuff. He was part of Zappa's band at one point. And they put out these 3 incredible records. And so here you have that 4-piece. And then Tony Levin was really part of the King Crimson family from then on out. Of course, the other big connection that ties back to the Stickman show was, again, I think in 94 when Thrak came out from King Crimson. They brought Bill Bruford back, and then they brought on Pat Mastelotto, who I actually really love his signature like a lot. He does like the whole thing, all drum. Actually, yeah, awesome stuff. Now, he was a session guy. He had played with Mr. Mister. Yes, that Mr. Mister. He had played on the Oranges and Lemons record, I think, from XTC. Technically the longest standing drummer in King Crimson history, because he was there in '94 and then was there during sort of their going away retirement stuff. So it was super cool meeting and hanging out with both those guys and talking to them. But that is sort of the very, very quick discography of this sort of full circle moment of, again, I started and knew who Tony Levin was because of Liquid Tension Experiment. And I'm going to tell y'all, if y'all don't know, this stuff's still like readily available. They reissued it, I think on Cleopatra maybe, because Magna Carta was the original. These got reissued. They're pretty cheap. Give it a stream. This stuff is wild. I think one of my favorite things here is what closes this is you have 3-minute warning part 1, which is 12 minutes, and then 3-minute warning part 2, which is 16 minutes, and those were improvs. But what I love here is it says, caution, 3-minute warning is not for the musically faint-hearted, impatient, or critics of extreme self-indulgence. Boy, that kind of just sums up the whole genre, doesn't it? But I absolutely love this stuff. Yeah, if you fall into the above categories, please remove the stylus after track 8. But yeah, Liquid Tension 2, and they actually did some other stuff too. Liquid Trio Experiment, which was when I think John Petrucci's had to leave the studio because his wife was giving birth. And so then it was just Tony, Jordan, and Mike. So no guitar, I think just doing Liquid Trio Experiment stuff, which is pretty wild as well. And so I think it's cool that, when I was in high school listening to, again, Dream Theater, and this was like the Dream Theater side project, this is what I was loving. And then later in life, it's like I fall in love with progressive rock, and fall in love with King Crimson, and I'm like, oh, Tony's all over that. And then I fall in love with Peter Gabriel, and he's all over that. And obviously, I showed this before, but I got a chance to see Peter on his I.O. tour back in September. And of course, Tony was there. And the whole time I'm thinking, damn, yeah, it's awesome seeing Peter Gabriel. This is a great show, but I'm really loving seeing Tony. Like, it was just a cool experience to see Tony up there. And the fact that I got to see him, I was within, I was watching him from 10 feet away, got to meet him afterwards, take some pictures with him. He signed the sleeve for me. Man, I know this was a terrible concert review in a sense, but to me, this was one of these, a total fanboy moment. I had to check myself. I'm like, damn, sir, you're at 34 and you're having a total fanboy moment over meeting Tony Levin. I was okay with that. I was totally okay with that. And I think that's what makes this stuff so much fun and keeps us young. And again, he's out there touring in a U-Haul van at the age of 79. This is not a moneymaker for him. But it's for the love of the game, right? And I just think it's the coolest. So, yeah, very quick, dirty concert review, show and tell, a little bit about Tony Levin and how great he is. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you got other cool Tony stories or what your favorite record is that Tony's on, I know there's a ton of Tony Levin fans out there. Would love to hear it, but thanks for sticking around. And yeah, be good out there. Cheers, y'all. Bye.